Well, my name is Pascual Berrone. I'm a professor in the Strategic Management Department at the IESE Business School. I'm based in the Madrid campus. I'm also the holder of the Schneider Electric Business Sustainability Chair, and I also the academic director of the executive MBA in Madrid and two centers. One is the International Center for Competitiveness and a research platform that we call IESE Cities in Motion. My research interest is in the intersection of corporate governance and sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Most of my work has been in this space, and in each of these two areas I have my own preferences. So in the case of corporate governance, I have focused mostly on family firms, and more recently on non-profit organizations. And in the case of sustainability, I cover a number of topics, but mainly greenwashing, environmental innovation, and more recently I'm pretty concerned about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the problems that many companies have in terms of implementing these goals. I grew up in a city called Ushuaia. It's the southernmost city in the world. It's a city that is located in an island in the south of Argentina. And that area enjoyed for many years a special tax regime. And the tax regime basically allowed many companies to pay no taxes for many years. And especially companies that were related to electronic components decided to locate in that place because of these tax benefits. Eventually that tax regime changed, and companies had to start paying taxes, and many of them left. And we saw, in firsthand how, the fact that they were there and they suddenly left caused a deep impact both in society and also in the environment. At the societal level, a lot of unemployment, and we suddenly discovered that in terms of the environment, they also been doing things that were not necessarily good for the environment. So that at that time, I think if I have to pick a moment in my life where I started to become concerned about this, that would be the moment, because I realized that the interaction between organizations and society in general was much more complex than at that time I had in mind. When you talk about sustainability is really, you're talking at least about three basic things. The first one is about goal priority. So goal priority, you decide on which is more important to you. Is it to use resources? Is it to preserve resources? Is to, you're making decisions in terms of priority. You're also making decisions taking into account the time horizon. When you talk about sustainability, it's really, for the most part, in the long term. What's going to be the impact, not necessarily today or tomorrow, but more long term. And the third element is about the risk that you are willing to take. What type of risk you are taking, and which are the risks that you decide that are simply too big to take. And these three elements, goal priority, time horizon, and risk-taking, are elements that fall under the responsibility of corporate governance. Corporate governance at the end are the ones who define what is important, what are the risks that the organization is willing to take, and also they decide what is going to be the time frame that the organization is going to have. So I see this connection between sustainability and corporate governance at that level. The paper really talks about the extent to which the behavioral theory of the firm applies to nonprofits. And what the theory basically says is that when an organization performs under its aspiration, the managers of these organizations are going to engage in risky activities. They're going to start searching for solutions to kind of match their performance with their aspiration level. And the opposite is also true. Whenever the performance is above the aspiration, you are in a success scenario and you tend to be more conservative. So we wanted to ask whether this is true in the context of nonprofits, and basically what we found is that consistent with the theory, whenever an organization is performing above aspiration, so they're doing financially well, they're going to be more conservative and they're going to invest less in fundraising, which tends to be risky and onerous. But surprisingly, we also found that whenever the nonprofit is performing below aspiration, they also become very conservative. So the question is, when are these type of organizations becoming more risk-seeking? And what we find is we develop the notion of programmatic performance, that is the performance that these nonprofits have in their specific programs. And what we found is that whenever they perform above their aspirations, so that means when they are doing very well in terms of the programs, that's when they're going to be more risk-seeking, which is a very unique insight, kind of against kind of the traditional view of the behavioral theory of the firm. When you think about grand challenges, there are two key characteristics. The first characteristic is that grand challenges they don't have an obvious solution, so it's not clear how to solve the problem of climate change or the problem of poverty or income inequality. And the second one, I think, is that it is clear that there's a single entity that can solve that problem. Okay, so it's not going to be a single government, it's not going to be just one company, it's not going to be one person that's going to solve that big challenge. You need cooperation. The key word here is cooperation. And what we found in that paper is that maybe governments and nonprofits are not really collaborating. So we kind of reflect about that, and maybe there's, I think personally for management scholars, an opportunity to explore this public-private collaboration and also this public-civic collaboration and how they can actually tackle grand challenges. The concept of socio-emotional wealth was first developed by Luis Gomez Mejia in his paper in ASQ 2007. And Luis was also my advisor, so this is how I got it to work with him on this topic. And they basically define socio-emotional wealth as the affective endowment. It's the kind of all the affective endowment that includes all the elements that are important for family members, but they are non-financial. So things like the preference for control, their care for future generations, all these elements that has been discussed in the past in the literature. The socio-emotional wealth concept is an all-encompassing construct that brings them together. In a subsequent paper, we kind of tried to identify the different dimensions of this construct. So this is an umbrella construct that is multidimensional. So we came up with the notion of the fiber model, and fiber stands for, let me see if I can remember. So family, control, and influence is the F. The I is identification of family members with the company. The B is the binding social ties. The E is the emotional attachment. And the R is the renewal of family bonds throughout generations. And this concept is, or this framework, I would call it more of as a framework. It's not a theory for me. Basically indicates that family firms and family members making decisions use this socio-emotional wealth as a reference point. So many people mistakenly they're confused in the sense that they think that whenever we talk about socio-emotional wealth is non-rational decisions, and it's not that. These are rational decisions. The thing is that the reference point is non-financial. I think the issue of what's the impact that your organization has on the environment is really strategic, right? So it's not something that is going to be defined by a single employee in your organization. This is something that is decided at the corporate governance level, and we kind of focus on the ownership, because ownership is at the end the one who sets kind of the direction of the organization, right? Either directly, as many cases as happens in many family firms, or either through the board that delegate that function on the board. So for me, I mean, it was kind of obvious to see that these type of decisions were at the corporate governance level, and again, the idea that we kind of focus on understanding the preferences of the different type of owners on this regard. And in particular, we cover family firms and see whether family firms tend to be more or less environmental conscious and environmental proactive when it comes to these issues. And what we found is that in principle they are more. So family firms tend to care more about the environment, and this finding that we published in ASQ 2010 received subsequent support by different papers, right? Saying, well, it seems like family, in certain contexts, tend to care more about the environment than non-family firms. My experience in other institutions has been extremely enriching. So. And by the way, I strongly recommend it. So if you have a chance, no matter the stage of your career, go ahead and do it, because it's going to be a very useful learning experience. So whenever you're out, not only you have the chance to collaborate with other people, but you also learn how other people do things, right? So you can learn not only about how to write a paper or how to conduct a certain type of project, or learn more about a new methodology that you didn't know, but you also have the possibility to learn other things that is going to be very important throughout your career. For instance, how people conduct recruiting, for instance, how they actually manage the incentive system for research. So that gives you an exposure to other forms of doing things that eventually are going to become very handy in your own professional career. Let me start with a cliche, which I'm sure everybody says this, but one obvious thing that you should do is, whenever you're picking your topic of your dissertation, make sure that this is something that you care about, or that you're interested in, because these are very long journeys, and if you don't have the interest on that, you're not going to succeed. That's for sure. You're going to get bored, and eventually you will get bored, and it's okay from time to time to renew yourself and really explore new frontiers and really trying to incorporate new topics as part of your portfolio. But at the beginning, it's very important that whatever you do is something that you have a sincere interest to learn more. Remember that our profession is about generating knowledge, so you need to be curious about the phenomenon that you study. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. That's the cliche, but I think it's an important element to keep in mind. The second thing that I would consider is to carefully select the people you work with. I think that's key. I've been extremely fortunate to have great people working with me, or are working with them, And in general, the recommendation is, well, make sure that you work with somebody who has a skill set that complements yours. But in addition to that, I would say that you also need to get along. You need to have this unique chemistry with the person. And you can see that in my papers. I have kind of the same set of co-authors because we get along very well. We understand each other. It's not only about skill set complementarity, it's also about making sure that we understand how we think and what is our perspective and how we would tackle a given issue. So the second advice would be make sure that you carefully select your partners. And perhaps a final one would be make sure that you have a support system. And a support system is either a hobby, it's either an activity outside academia, it can be your family, it can be your friends. These are, long periods of time with not always positive outcomes. Sometimes we get a lot of negative feedback and we get rejections. So you need to make sure that your support system is there so you can take some time off and do something else to clear your mind.